Now we're going to switch to the other side of the world, and our next speaker is Brigadier General Dave Francis, Deputy Commanding General for the 2nd Infantry Division, 8th U.S. Army in Korea. So Dave, if you'll join us, and we'll get started with that.
Thanks. Well, good morning, everybody. And the crowd continues to thin out here a little bit. But hey, I will tell you that I'd like to thank Quad A, General Sinclair, General Gaylor for giving us the opportunity to come and speak to you today about what's going on in the Korean theater of operations. As you all know by watching the news, things have gotten exciting in Korea, and I want to do a couple things for you today. One is to give you the context in which we're operating today in the Korean theater of operations. Two, talk to you about some of the ways that we are using multi-domain operations, which is kind of the topic of what we're going to discuss today. And thirdly, for this astute crowd, some of the capabilities we think would be useful as we move into the future. And so it's my pleasure to represent the 2nd Infantry Division today and the 8th United States Army. And so what I'd like to do is start by showing you a little video of some of the things we have going on. Please roll the video.
For more than half a century, 2nd Infantry Division soldiers have held the line of freedom's front with their Republic of Korea teammates, always ready to fight tonight and win. That unwavering readiness is as strong now as ever as Warrior Division troops continue to demonstrate their agile and adaptive spirit in today's emerging multi-domain operational environment. As the Army's only permanently forward deployed and only combined division, 2ID's credible and resilient warfighters are prepared to work seamlessly as part of a joint and combined force across land, air, sea, space, and cyberspace domains. To achieve this multi-domain readiness, combined division warriors train like their lives depend on it. Every day they work side by side with their ROC teammates through some of the toughest, most realistic training in the world that's designed to prepare them to execute their critical wartime mission sets if called upon to fight tonight. Maritime Counter Special Operation Force, or MCSOF, is one of those unique mission sets that demonstrate 2ID's inherent multi-domain character. MCSOF training brings together the division's 2nd Combat Aviation Brigade and the ROC Navy's 2nd Fleet to build proficiency for countering potential infiltration by Maritime Special Operating Forces. By employing intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance systems, U.S. rotary wing aviation assets, and ROC naval ships, each MCSOF exercise strengthens synchronization across the land, air, and sea domains. The training enables the ROC Navy to achieve maritime control by leveraging the U.S. Apache Longbow helicopter's maneuverability, speed, and firepower to engage and destroy identified targets. The division's Counter Weapons of Mass Destruction, or CWMD wartime mission set, also requires its warriors to prepare to execute and dominate on the multi-domain battlefield. Exercise Warrior Strike replicates the tactical scenarios and operational environment of potential real-world CWMD contingencies and enables its maneuver battalion and support elements to become experts in CWMD operations. Together, ROC and U.S. forces present multiple dilemmas to the enemy by projecting power from unexpected directions and domains through ship-to-shore and traditional air assault operations, joint fires operations, information operations, and other synchronized joint and combined activities. They leverage global satellite communications during movement and CWMD site exploitation to quickly analyze and disseminate information back to commanders on the ground, always staying a step ahead of the enemy. These intense training events and the countless joint and combined engagement Warrior Division troops experience daily demonstrate their commitment to physically and mentally defeating their adversaries across the multi-domain battlefield. Today's combined division professionals continue the unit's second-to-none legacy through their enduring fight-tonight readiness.
All right, so that was just a little look at some of the things we have going on. There are a couple of things I'd like to point out in that video. One is, and I just noticed this, is that John Evans made it into the video, so I will have to counsel our PAO. Second, some of the deck landing qualifications you saw in there were on the Korean ship, the Dokdo, and it was the teamwork of the 25th Cab and Ken Chase's guys that came out there to help us do a self-start on getting some of those crews qualified to enable us to do some of the operations that I'll describe here in just a moment. And the third is, you saw 58 Deltas in that video. That's not because it's an old video that I dragged out for this presentation, but it's really a shout out to Lieutenant Colonel Adam Frederick and his Sergeant Major Overby, who just recently completed the last rotation and the last OH-58 Delta equipped cavalry squadron in the U.S. Army. They did a magnificent job over a very diverse mission set, and they closed out that era of Army aviation very strong, and I just wanted to share that with you. Adam and his team did a phenomenal job. And then really it's to the aviation enterprise, where we now have Clint Cody and 16 HARS deployed to the peninsula and bringing us a tremendous capability as we continue to build HARS in the Army and develop that capability. So with that, again, what I'd like to do is kind of go into the purpose of our operation here. Why talk about multi-domain operations or cross-domain operations in some circles? And it's really very, very simple. If you go to the next slide, please. It's really to generate options for our ground force commanders. That's what we're all about. I heard it said about 15 times yesterday. But the bottom line is, what we are all about is generating maneuver options for our commanders. Now, if you've ever served in Korea, or if you've ever just taken a look at the terrain there, you know it's a peninsula. It's surrounded on three sides by water. It's got a historical tendency for amphibious or cross-domain operations. And as you look at the interior of the country, compared to when I was there as a second lieutenant 27 years ago, the urban buildup and the urban sprawl is staggering. And so our maneuver options on the ground are more and more limited every day. Plus, we've had 66 years of both North and South Korea building up barrier systems and other challenges to ground maneuver over the years. So what that has led us to is, how do we generate maneuver options for a ground force commander? So in order to set the conditions for that, let me just give you a quick stroll through the area and kind of give you the context of where we sit today versus what some of you may think. Next slide. Okay, so this is a slide I stole from Admiral Swift, the Pac Fleet Commander, which I thought was pretty interesting. More people live inside of that circle than outside of that circle. And if you take a look at what is almost dead center in the middle of that circle, it's the Korean Peninsula. And so I don't know that you draw necessarily conclusions for that, other than a significant amount of the world's population lives in this arena, and where you have people there, you have friction. Next slide. So in the strategic environment, let's just take a look at some of the things that are going on there. So you have 1/5 of the world's economic output comes from this region, 20% of the world's trade or thereabouts, 5 of the 13 world's largest armies, 4 of the 6 world's largest militaries, and so forth. So and the Korean Peninsula is centrally located in this area of the world. Some of the other actors that have an influence over this, certainly China, Japan, Russia, and South Korea, which has its own challenges right now. And I would tell you that, you know, an interesting piece here as we look at the current situation is the fact that for the first time in its history, South Korea impeached its president, and on May 9th here, in about a week and a half, they will hold elections to elect their new president. So it's a very, very dynamic situation. If you just watch the news, you get little snippets about some of the interaction that's going on with Japan, with China, with Russia, all trying to figure out how it is that we mitigate the threat that exists in North Korea, which has its own pretty significant threats to us. So if you go to the next slide. And this is a pretty illustrative slide. Many of you have probably seen it, but it's a satellite photo of the Korean Peninsula. And this is a pretty recent one, I think within the last 6 months or so. And it really highlights the difference between the North and South Korea. So the bright spot about mid-slide there is Seoul, a city of about 12 million people within a few miles of the demilitarized zone, the most heavily defended border on the planet right now. But the most striking thing is when you look to the north and you see the vast blackness there of a satellite photo at night. The one dot you do see there is Pyongyang, the capital, but the rest of it is blacked out. And of course, that gives you indicators of a lot of different things. It indicates the control the government has over the population, over its services, over the internet, and several other aspects of its society. It also is an indicator of its inability to provide for its people, much of that based on the amount of money it spends on defense. Next slide. So kind of here's where we kind of sit with Korea right now. So Kim Jong-un is in charge. We don't think there's anybody telling him what to do and say. We think he is in charge right now. His primary concern is the survival of the regime. So when you look at all the other factors that potentially could be motivating to him, so a lot of people say, hey, this guy's irrational. He's actually extremely rational, we believe. And every action that he takes has an intended consequence and an intended effect. He may not be right in his assessments of how that's going to work out, but we don't think he's irrational. North Korea's isolation continues to be a challenge for everybody to see what's going on in the country. If you'll remember, when Kim Jong-un came to power, it was several days before our own State Department even knew that his father had passed away. So it remains a closed society, although what you're finding is more and more folks, as the defectors continue to rise, are coming out, and you've seen some of that in the news recently. They're coming out and talking about how things are going inside the country, from economics to being able to feed the population to their military, and to include their attitudes. I will tell you, I sat with, about a week ago, there were two North Korean defectors, both in their mid-20s, one male and one female, and they came into USFK to talk about their experiences. And when asked the question, what do you think about all the provocations that Kim Jong-un is doing, they said, well, when you're sitting there in the country, that's all you ever hear. And so we thought that's exactly what we need to be doing. He's our strong leader, and he is doing exactly what needs to happen because there's no other comparison for them to have to. So they truly believe that what this leader is doing is absolutely correct. They did not agree necessarily with the deity status that they like to impose, where you literally have his picture in your house and you bow to it every time you walk by it. But they were very pragmatic, and now that they had come, and they had both been out of the country for, I think, a year or so. And so as they looked around, they became very pragmatic and thought that while they were there, that's exactly what should be happening. Okay, and of course, the North Koreans have compulsory military service. So every able-bodied young man includes their ability to build a 1 million-man army, or just a little bit bigger than that. Large ground-based military, fourth largest in the world, 70% forward deployed in and around the demilitarized zone. And the terrain is 70% mountainous, and like I said, the urban sprawl that has occurred, at least in South Korea, is truly, in fact, a challenge. And when you think about the number of citizens, U.S. citizens or American citizens that we have there, and our requirement to get those folks out, that's a daunting challenge in and of itself. They also have the world's largest special operations forces. Now, that's probably a relative term. I would not compare North Korean special operations forces in any way, shape, or form to ours. However, they do have a very large force that is designed to do very specific things, and that's some of what we'll talk about here. So they do remain highly lethal. They do have a large stockpile of conventional munitions that are just as deadly, even though they may not be high-tech as they have been in the past. And of course, one of our primary concerns is artillery, which I'll talk about here in just a second. They can strike asymmetrically with ballistic missiles in SOF, and they do have what we believe is a very large population of sleeper agents that do reside in South Korea and can be activated. And they do believe that through escalation, they can achieve the effects that they're trying to do. Next slide, please. Okay, this is what has primarily been in the news lately, is their asymmetric threat. Kim Jong-un, and I'll show you here on a slide in just a minute, has done more provocations, like 4 times as many as his father and grandfather did combined since North Korea was created. And so what happens is, what they've realized over time is that, hey, we need an asymmetric capability. We're not going to win a conventional fight, although we will inflict some significant damage. We're not going to win that conventional fight, so we need another way to do that. And they really believe that the only way they're going to get a seat at the table in any type of negotiation is to have a nuclear capability that they can deliver. And so over the years, we've been kind of pushing that to the wayside after every test, every ballistic missile test, nuclear test, and so forth. Well, now we're at the point where they're learning every single time. They're getting better. And despite the fact that their most recent test was a failure, I would tell you that they are learning. They are getting better with every try that they do. And they are not an unthinking enemy here that's on remote control. They have some very talented scientists that are working not only on the ballistic missile side, but on the CWMD side as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so their conventional threat, again, it's about a 1 million-man army, 4,200 tanks, and really it's that artillery that's a problem. Both the long-range artillery, which is one of our most significant concerns, is that if something were to spur a response that involved artillery all along the DMZ, they could inflict some serious damage into the greater Seoul metropolitan area, and that would cause all kinds of problems to occur. So they do have a significant conventional threat that is still very, very lethal, although their ability to use it and sustain it over time is very, very questionable. You can see their naval order of battle as well, not as significant in terms of the threat. However, what their maritime capability does give them the ability to do is deliver special operations forces, which leads us to one of the missions that we are involved in. Next slide, please. Okay, so here's some potential places where we're going to have a problem in Korea, or provocations that could occur that could lead to some sort of escalation. One is the Northern Limit Line standoff, and if you looked on the lower left-hand portion of the slide, you see the Northern Limit Line, which is basically an extension of the DMZ out over the water. That has been a significant contentious point, primarily because of fishing rights. Although we have had multiple provocations, you might remember the artillery shooting in Waipido Island and the sinking of the Chonon, which happened back in 2010. Very significant activities that occurred in fairly recent history that cause us to have continued tensions out there. Incursions into the DMZ have been occurring really throughout our 66 years on the Korean Peninsula, and although they have not necessarily been incursions lately, we have had incidents in the fairly recent past of rock soldiers stepping on landmines in the vicinity of the DMZ that were recently planted, indicating that there were, in fact, DMZ incursions. Reaction to balloon leaflet drops. You know, one of the interesting things is, and this is coming from our G2, but listening to the defectors, they were not concerned about the leaflets. They actually, both of them had seen leaflet drops that had come from South Korea into North Korea, and they knew it. They knew that it was that it wasn't real; it was propaganda. So that didn't influence them. It didn't seem to be too much there. The missile launches and nuclear tests are probably the biggest provocation that they have at their disposal right now. They can do it pretty much at will. And again, watching the news, you have a whole bunch of open source folks out there that are watching this problem set, and I will tell you that he has the capability to do that at the time and place of his choosing pretty much right now. And how that's responded to, as you have seen in the news here recently, has an effect on what we're trying to get accomplished there. And then cyber intrusions are also on the rise, and we've seen that in the form of GPS denial and other things that we know that as an aviation enterprise we're working through right now. Next slide. Okay, just let me give you a snapshot of the provocations here. And really, I don't need you to look at all of them. Just look at the number of stars there from 2012 to 2015. And if you go to the next slide, you can see how many of those things have increased. And really the concerning part about this is not necessarily that they're doing provocations. You know, that's not necessarily a huge problem. What is a problem, though, is they're getting better every time that they do a missile test, every time that they do a nuclear test, and that's the concern that we're all worried about right now. Next slide. So what that basic scenario has led you to is the mission sets that we have in the 2nd Infantry Division. So obviously we're part of 8th Army, which is part of U.S. Forces Korea, and we have some specific mission sets. And so I wanted to give you the context of how we're operating, but now I'm going to bring you back down into the tactical arena where I'm going to talk specifically about 2 mission sets that our aviation brigade is accomplishing now under the leadership of Lance Calvert, and what we're doing to train to those things, and then maybe some of the things that we ought to be thinking about as a branch or as the aviation enterprise as we move forward. So if you go to the next slide, please. Okay, so these are wartime mission sets for the 2nd Infantry Division, and I'm going to focus on the 2 in the box there, Maritime Counter SOF and Counter Weapons of Mass Destruction. These are unique mission sets that are here on the Korean Peninsula. The Maritime Counter SOF is essentially designed to defeat a SOF infill via sea, and that can either be in the West Sea or the East Sea. Primarily, we're focused in the West right now. But the primary mission is to defeat that SOF threat before it reaches the mainland there. Okay, and the second is counter weapons of mass destruction. We know for a fact that that he has multiple locations that have weapons of mass destruction, and those sites are very, very important to us. So while we are conducting direct action combined arms maneuver to defeat and destroy enemy forces, we are also very, very focused on getting control of all of those sites that contain weapons of mass destruction. Next slide. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about Maritime Counter SOF. This has matured over time due to the leadership of guys like John Evans and folks before him. It has matured to the point where we have an attack helicopter battalion that for a portion of time works for the 2nd ROK Fleet and the 2nd Time Maritime Battle Group in the ROK Navy. And their sole purpose for a period of time is to, in fact, defeat and destroy this threat. So what this puts us at from a multi-domain point of view is we are in a situation where we're flying out over the water in direct support of our surface commander, who in this case is a naval commander, to defeat a specific threat using direct fire from our AH-64s. We are guided onto targets by ROK controllers in some cases, and in other cases, depending on the scenario, we might have some U.S. folks out there. But the bottom line is we take an Apache helicopter battalion and we execute attack operations over the water to find and destroy enemy targets. And so the challenges that are associated with that are many. First of all, it was just being able to work with ROK forces, ROK naval forces in particular, was a challenge. We have matured this capability to the point where not only are we interoperable, we're doing live fire with them about every 2 weeks right now to develop this capability. And one of the challenges is right now we are doing that manually. So we're doing manual target handovers because their Lynx aircraft and ours aren't able to talk from an electronics or a common operation picture point of view. So target handover is done manually, although we have put many procedural measures in place to facilitate that. It's still going to be very, very challenging because not only, it's not just an attack helicopter battalion out there, but you have other joint fires. You have ground-based artillery that's also shooting into this airspace. We have casts from both the ROCs and U.S. forces, U.S. naval forces primarily, and the U.S. Air Force, that are all operating in very, very congested airspace. And so how we conduct mission command in that environment is very, very challenging. We're putting LNOs on ships, and we're putting ad hoc mission command packages together to enable us to be able to communicate with both the ROCs and the U.S. forces while we are out there. So this is a capability that is, in fact, being developed, and I would encourage anybody that is studying multi-domain operations as we build a concept. We look at building organizations that are multi-domain oriented, and we develop the doctrine for that to come on out and see what's happening in Korea. It might give you some insights into some of the challenges associated with conducting these operations. But what I would tell you, go to the next slide, please. So we operate with a whole host of various joint and combined forces in order to enable this operation out here. And we have dedicated a significant amount of time to training this, doing live training with the ROC Navy in the West Sea primarily, and particularly with the amount of live fire that we're doing. And so it's very important that we identify our TTPs and we get that back to the aviation enterprise so that you can see some of the challenges that we're faced with, and you can help us develop some of the capabilities that we need out there. But you know, some of the other things that would be, you know, as we've talked about before, is our limitations right now are how far out over the water can we go, and have a FARP capability. If we had FVL, we had the speed, range, and the payload to be able to get out there even deeper and farther and be able to defeat that threat earlier. It would be far better than our current capability exists right now. How do we interact with not only the ROC Navy? It's actually sometimes easier working with the ROC Navy than it is our own, particularly when we're talking about munitions and how we handle munitions on ships and so forth. These are just the daily activities that we continue to work through as we mature this particular mission set. But it is a unique mission set for an attack helicopter battalion, and I say it's unique. It's a mission set that we have in Korea. I know that there are other folks out there. Ken Chase has got Apaches operating off of ships. The guys in Kuwait are doing the same thing. But this is just a perspective in Korea on how we're doing it. But I will tell you that the second ROC fleet is, you talk about ready to fight tonight, these guys don't, you know, their ships are always on and pointed out to sea, and they stay local because they're worried about this particular threat. Okay, next slide. And so as we look at mission command on this particular problem set, we have the issue of how we communicate with the ROCs is how we have to do it over Centrics, how we created a common operational picture. Their version of BFT is really not it's a cellular-based thing that doesn't work very far out into the water. And so our ability to see each other, communicate with each other, have a common picture, and hand off targets is a challenge. And you know, we would ask the aviation enterprise to continue to help us build those networks that we can use in multiple locations to help us to do that. Additionally, our FARP capability is challenged because you're out over the water. You have a couple of islands out there that we could use, but right now we're using we're doing it off of ships or having to fly back into land to rearm and refit. Next slide. Next, please. Thank you. Okay, so let me switch over to our counter weapons of mass destruction mission here, and really, again, it's about being able to conduct combined arms maneuver to be able to isolate, contain, and exploit WMSL sites or locations where we have weapons of mass destruction. So this is a very challenging mission. Speed is of the essence, and our ability to maneuver very quickly, rapidly, to find emerging requirements and targets is absolutely essential. And as we have studied the IPB of the peninsula itself, as we look at, I mean, if you've been to Seoul on a Saturday night, you know what a challenge just simply driving on the roads is going to be, let alone conducting combined arms maneuver through the mega city of Seoul and beyond is going to be challenging. Also, as you get north, the road networks aren't exactly four-lane freeways. The roads are not good. They will not support a lot of our heavy mechanized and armored forces for long periods of time. So we, again, have been forced to take a look at what other options can we develop for the ground force commander that will enable us to be able to still get after those targets despite the challenges that we find ourselves on the ground. And of course, again, on a Korean Peninsula, what that has led us to is, hey, we need to be able to project forces from other platforms other than what we currently have on hand. And so what we've developed is an exercise called Warrior Strike, where we go after these WMSL sites via various means. And as we develop the situation on one, we'll get intel for an emerging site on another. And what we believe is that we're going to have a very rapid capability to move, and of course Army Aviation is the perfect fit for that form of maneuver and that vertical envelopment to get around both the air defense threat, to get around the lock congestion that we know we're going to have, and all the other challenges of terrain and so forth that we know exist in Korea. So if you go to the next slide, please. And so, as we speak here, 116 Infantry out of the 1st Armored Brigade Combat Team, 1st Infantry Division, is en route to the Pyeongtaek Harbor, where they're gonna embark on the Korean amphib ship, the Dokdo, and we're going to conduct an air assault next week. They're going to go out to sea, and then we're going to, for the first time, do a battalion-level air assault off of the Dokdo. So this is the first time we've done this, at least in recent history, and so we're developing a lot of TTPs and cooperation with the ROC Navy to be able to do this. But we believe that whether it's a capability that we're going to need, whether it's off a ROC ship, a U.S. ship, or any other type of platform out there, we are going to have the ability to maneuver from different places so that we create options for the commander to put ourselves in a position of relative advantage over the enemy and create multiple dilemmas for the enemy force from different locations and different domains. And so just to describe this exercise a little bit, it's live, virtual, and constructive. So we will operate forces in all of those things. You can see those forces on the left-hand side. We will execute ground maneuver up at the Rodriguez live fire complex, where we'll execute combined arms live fire to get to a WMSL site. And then we will have emerging intelligence that leads us to an emerging target that we'll go to in another location from the Dokdo. And some of the things we're going to exercise on this are, one, if you think about it, we took an Armored Brigade Combat Team, mechanized infantry guys out of that. We sent them through the Dunker, and now we're going to put them on a ship, and they're going to do an air assault in the Korean Peninsula. So way out of their comfort zone, but as we look at ways to develop maneuver, that's one of the ways that we're working this. So we're going to develop that capability, and we're going to execute that air assault off of the ship. And we're going to execute multiple things simultaneously. So we'll have CAS involved in that, creating a breach along the shore that allows us to penetrate, to go inland, using naval gunfire with Anglicos. We'll be using fixed-wing platforms, joint fires, as well as attack helicopters to help us to accomplish that. We'll launch off the boat and go in and execute that air assault operation. We'll also be conducting conditions checks over mission command systems that are working through the ship's systems, over centrics that allow us to do that. So we'll be doing that from a C-2 aircraft, from the ship, and from land-based command posts at various locations on the peninsula. So we're trying to work through the friction of conducting mission command of the wide expanse of operations over a rapidly changing battlefield from multiple locations. And just like as General Tate mentioned, our aviation brigades aren't meant to split that way. We really haven't built division headquarters to split this way either. And as we go through further headquarters reductions here in the future, that's going to continue to be a challenge as we also test our mission command systems at the division level over time. So, next slide, please. Okay, so just a few takeaways here, and we'll wrap this up here. So, multi-domain operations create options for commanders to get that position of advantage and create multiple dilemmas for the enemy. And I think we've always got to keep that at the forefront of what we're thinking about when we're looking at maneuver options out there. Okay, but they also require training at echelon. We have to be masters of the fundamentals of our profession. Because in order to do this, even at a very basic level, you have to be very proficient in our aviation tasks, in our mission command tasks, and the way that we're training our aviators, and not to mention our infantrymen who don't normally do this for a living, coming out of the mech infantry world. So, and I think this is an ability that we've gotten over time in Iraq and Afghanistan, is that we're taking folks out of standard missions and doing what's required when we need them to do that, and this is one of those. We also, you know, in these resource constraint times, everybody knows we've got to maximize every training event, using live, virtual, constructive, exercise, and command posts from the company all the way up to the division level or higher, and be able to do that. This environment in Korea allows us to do that on a regular basis, so we're very fortunate from that respect. We also have to make sure that we're working hard to create these training opportunities. And it's not just exercises, but it's also the partnership that's involved, the relationships that are developed, and the capabilities that we refine as we continue to do these operations that we get back to the aviation enterprise to help us out with. Okay? Interoperability is always a challenge and will remain so as we go through partnered and joint forces. I know talking to General Tate, to Muddy Waters, that interoperability is continually challenged. Simple things like talking on the radio is a challenge for everybody out there. And then shared understanding. How do you develop a common operational picture when you have various aircraft and other vehicles out there, be they ships, be they tanks, that don't operate on the same BFT system that we use? How do we see each other? How do we communicate? And how do we do that? How do we do clearance of fires? Another challenge. If we have aircraft that aren't equipped with Link 16, and so forth, how we hand targets over, how we do clearance of fires, and how we hand over targets is very, very challenging, and something that we just have to continue to work through. And then finally, I would say that leader development is key. And as we look at future vertical lift, and I know this is already happening as we design future airframes and so forth, but I would just put it out there for this collective group that the world outside is complex. As you heard from General Tate, as you heard from this, that we're living in a complex world, and the more we can simplify the world in the cockpit, the better we can deal with the world outside the cockpit. And so as we're looking at all of the systems that go into the future of Army aviation, I would ask you to take all those things into consideration, because at the end of the day, we're going to have young leaders out there, young platoon leaders, company commanders that are going to have an aircraft with 30 infantrymen in the back, and as General Papa said yesterday, when he gets on the back of that aircraft, it's complete and total confidence in that aviator's ability to do the mission and get the mission done. And our leader development process has to be such that we do that. The aircraft we create have to be such that we've reduced the complexity inside the cockpit so that we can focus on the complexity outside of the cockpit. And so that's my challenge to you today. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for the aviation enterprise and what you do every day to support the warfighters. Second to none, fight tonight. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, General Francis. Obviously, between his presentation and that of General Tate's, you can see that we do, in fact, live in a much more complex world than just beyond Iraq and Afghanistan and parts of Africa.